Hello and happy Halloween, everyone. Welcome to my annual Halloween special. And this year I'm going to be doing something that I have never done on this channel, and I'm going to be covering a true crime story. Specifically, a murder mystery. In a segment I'm choosing to call Ashes to Ashes. See what I did there? Thank you guys for joining me on this very special Halloween episode. As I said before, I am covering a true crime story, something that I've never done on this channel, and I'm actually very excited to get into this particular case. Now, before we start, you might ask yourself, like, Kyle, your channel is now called Smoke and Revelry, and you're talking about a murder case. How is that in any way related to Revelry? Obviously, you're smoking a cigar while you're talking about it, but where's the revelry? Where's the celebration? Where's the excitement? Well, the case that I'm going to cover actually has justice served at the end, which is definitely something to celebrate. Before we get started, the cigar I'm smoking tonight is the Rocky Patel No. 6, courtesy of my dad, and it is a pretty good smoke so far, and I am glad I picked this one while sharing this case with you guys. Now, as you may have seen in my socials, the case that I am covering is the murder of a man named Jack Jessee. You also may remember that in my socials, I said that I have a personal connection to this case. And that connection is a man by the name of Dave Jessee, the brother of the victim. Dave Jessee is someone that I grew up around. His wife, Jane, has been and is still a very good friend of my mom's. They have been friends for years. I grew up around Jane and Dave, spent a lot of time around them, and Dave was instrumental in getting justice for his brother. I do regret to inform everyone, though, that Dave did pass away earlier this year, and yes, we are all very sad that he is no longer with us, but Dave was a good man, loved his family, loved his brother, and he was incredibly dedicated and steadfast in getting justice for his brother, making sure those responsible for his murder were brought to justice. But obviously, I am getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and dig into the case of Jack Jessee. Jack Jessee was a dedicated family man, loved his children, loved his grandchildren, his extended family, and he was very close with his siblings. They would vacation together. Once a month, they would get together and go bowling and have a lot of fun. There's a lot of family videos taken of all their various get-togethers and adventures, and Jack was one of those guys who just everyone loved. Everyone loved to be around him. He just was a very kind, trusting, and loving man. He loved classic cars, would never say no to a glass of Chardonnay, and enjoyed going on, walks in his spare time, and he just loved spending time with family. He was especially close with, as I mentioned before, his brother Dave. Jack was a mechanical engineering manager at a company called Fujitsu Electronics, and during his time at that company in the early 80s, he met a woman named Sandra. Jack and Sandra would hit it off, they would fall in love, and in 1984 they would eventually get married. This would be Jack's second marriage, Sandra's third, and Sandra would be bringing into the relationship a son from a previous relationship named Tom. Jack had two daughters from his previous marriage, Cherie and Cheryl, and after getting married, they came together as a family unit. Now, while it would seem that Jack and Sandra had a good relationship, good marriage, unfortunately, there was some negative energy already brought into the relationship over time as Sandra began to express the fact that she didn't care much for Cherie and Cheryl. Now, I'm fairly sure that she never expressed these feelings to Jack. However, Cherie and Cheryl had something to say about Sandra's attitude towards them, and suffice it to say, it wasn't a good attitude. Sandra did whatever she could to try and push the girls away from her and their father. She didn't like them at all. However, she did have a very strong attachment to her son Tom, and again, according to Cherie and Cheryl, it wasn't really a very healthy one. In fact, it bordered on creepy. It seemed like Sandra had a very unhealthy fixation on her son. She doted on him like mothers do, but she also seemed to maintain this sense of just always needing to have him close and always wanting him around, and basically kind of a wherever you go, I go, you're my baby boy sort of thing. And yeah, according to Jack's daughters and others, it was kind of bizarre. Fast forward to the year 1998, and Jack and Sandra have been married for roughly 14 years. And earlier in that year, two things happened. The first of those things is that Jack would be diagnosed with colon cancer and would begin his appointments to undergo treatment. During one particular appointment, a nurse would be having a conversation with Sandra about how to care for Jack while at home as he recovered from his treatments. One of the things that the nurse would try to instruct Sandra in doing is how to help change Jack's colostomy bag. Something of which Sandra was absolutely against. She had no desire to do anything of that sort, even if it meant helping her ailing husband. Now, according to this nurse, who would later write this in her report after the visit, Sandra was absolutely just disgusted and so against doing this that she pretty much ran to the other side of the hospital or whatever room they were in, and almost acted as if she were just like was just ignoring the nurse, almost like la 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 la, nope, not hearing you, nope, sorry, nope. That was pretty much Sandra's attitude towards her ailing husband. The second thing that would occur around the same time is that Sandra's son Tom, the one she has the unhealthy attachment to, decided he was going to move to Arizona. This was another thing Sandra was not happy about. She hated the idea of her son being so far away. She had to be near her son. She had to have him close. And so she basically tried to convince Jack to move to Arizona. And Jack was not having it. He did not want to move to Arizona, especially considering the fact that he had just begun his treatments and most of his family was in California. He didn't want to leave his daughters. He didn't want to leave the life that he had built in California behind. And Sandra was very unhappy. They got into an argument, they got into a fight, and it was not pleasant. Later on, prior to one of their monthly bowling nights, Jack would be sitting with his brother Dave, and after that argument, he basically said to Dave, and during the discussion, he's like, hey man, if anything happens to me, Sandra did it. I mean, that is just insane, to have an argument so bad that you honestly believe that your wife would do something horrible to you, possibly kill you. But apparently this wasn't the first time that Jack had said anything of that nature, because in a prior conversation with his daughters, apparently after another spat or argument, he basically told them, you know what, I honestly feel like the bitch is going to kill me. So suffice it to say, this relationship was not a healthy one. And it would be Jack's diagnosis, the pending treatments, and the financial strain that would come from those treatments in which Sandra decided, you know what? No, I'm not doing this. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to blow our savings on medical bills. So you know what? Jack needs to die. All to avoid paying hospital and medical expenses. Sandra did not want to end up with a hole in her pocket, so she just decided that she was going to off her husband. And if that wasn't bad enough, she decided to recruit her son. Sandra decided to rope her son into her little conspiracy. And it would be through her son Tom that they would recruit someone in order to help them carry out Jack's murder. That someone that Tom would end up recruiting was one of his co-workers at Target, as well as someone who apparently would deal him drugs on occasion, a guy by the name of Brett Schraubin. Sandra would offer to pay Brett $50,000 for the hit. In preparing for the murder, Brett Schraubin would actually recruit one of his other friends, a guy by the name of Thomas Garrick, who was a local drifter, to be the getaway driver while he committed the murder, and offered him a $20,000 payout to do so. The night of August 13th, 1998 rolls around, and it's one of the hottest days of the year. Apparently, it's the hottest day on record up to that point. And Sandra offers to go grab Jack some food from a local Burger King while she's out running out a couple other errands. Jack agrees, requests some chicken nuggets and a strawberry milkshake, and Sandra said she was also going to go grab some ice and run to the bank while she did that, and so she was off on her way. After leaving, she would signal her son and Brett Schrauben by phone that she had left the house and now was the window of time for them to go in and commit the murder. So Brett and Thomas get into the car and head over to Jack's house. And it should be noted that Jack is at home recovering from 2 surgeries. Now, it should be noted that Jack was at home recovering from 2 surgeries. One of them was a surgery that was part of his treatment for his colon cancer. The second was a surgery in order to circumvent an infection he had developed after the first surgery. Jack was in an incredibly vulnerable and weakened state, and Sandra decided that that was the best time to have someone go over there and kill him. I mean, talk about sick and twisted. It's already bad enough that she wants to kill her husband. She decides to have him killed in an incredibly vulnerable and even humiliating position. Jack was not in any real state to fight off an attacker. So Brett and Thomas arrive at the house. Brett goes in through one of the back doors, and he is getting some major cold feet. He was having cold feet on the way to the house, having serious second thoughts to what he was doing, and he could not bring himself to go in and kill Jack. He called up Tom and said, "Hey man, I'm getting cold feet. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can, I don't know. I think I need to go. I'm going to leave." So he heads back out there, tells his buddy Thomas that he doesn't know if he can do this. And apparently, according to Schrauben's testimony, Thomas agreed to be the one to go in and kill Jack. So Thomas sneaks into the house and he pulls out what some of the court documents described as like a Rambo-style knife, and he moves in to kill Jack. Now, obviously, Jack was incredibly surprised. He was not expecting anyone to be in his house, much less some random dude wielding a knife. And apparently, Jack got up, threw something at his attacker. I think it was he threw the phone, and this was in the late 90s, so you know it was a landline phone. And if it was the kind of phone that I'm thinking of, it was a heavy ass phone, and he chucked it at Thomas as he was coming at him with the knife. And even though he was in an incredibly weakened state, Jack put up a fight. Thomas would go in with the knife and try to stab Jack. Jack would put his hands up in order to defend himself, and Thomas was having trouble. He did not expect Jack to have this much strength in the state that he was in, and so he had to stab him a couple of times in the chest in order to get Jack to go down, and he would end up stabbing him a total of 9 more times. However, minutes before Brett and Thomas would arrive, Jack had actually called his daughter Cheryl, because Sandra was taking an awfully long time to just go pick up chicken nuggets and a milkshake and ice and go to the bank and all of that kind of stuff. And he didn't know where she was, and he was starting to get worried. So he calls Cheryl and asks her to come over. At this point, it's a little after 9 o'clock in the evening. Cheryl comes over to go check on her dad, see what's going on. And he said, "Hey, Sandra hasn't been back for a good minute. I don't know where she is. Could you maybe go out to where she said she was going to go and, kind of see if you can get eyes on her, see if you can find her?" Cheryl agrees, and she leaves the house. Cheryl was only gone for 15 minutes, and it would be during this time that Brett Schrauben and Thomas Garrick would arrive at the house. Brett would chicken out and decide he didn't want to commit the murder. Thomas would go in and kill Jack, and they would both get in the car and drive away. Minutes later, Cheryl would come home and find her father dead on the floor in a pool of blood. Initially, she thought that maybe he had fallen, hit his head on something, because there was a pretty nasty laceration in the back of his head, but she rolled him over to find out that he indeed hadn't fallen and he had been stabbed multiple times, 11 times in total. Authorities were called, first responders arrived on the scene, and Jack was pretty much pronounced dead on the scene. His family was left absolutely devastated. Immediately after Jack's murder, Dave Jessee, his brother, just knew that Sandra had something to do with it. Unfortunately for the authorities, Brett Schrauben and Thomas Garrick, they did not leave a single bit of physical evidence tying them to the scene after the murder, and Sandra was brought in for questioning. Naturally, she played the grieving wife in front of them, detailing what she was doing during the time of the murder, where she was, what she was up to, basically securing what would seem to be a rock-solid alibi to show that she had nothing to do with it. Oddly enough, there was suspicion on Jack's daughter Cheryl initially because of the very short time window that she claimed to have come by, left to go find Sandra, and then come back and found her father. But she was very quickly ruled out as a suspect. Sandra was and remained for a long time a person of interest. However, there was no real evidence in order to prove that she had any involvement in Jack's murder whatsoever, and so they had to let her go. Immediately after Jack's death, Sandra, obviously being the main beneficiary, being Jack's wife, she collected his 401k and his retirement, as well as his life insurance benefits, all in all, clearing close to about $700,000. And Sandra wasted absolutely no time after receiving that money in going out and just blowing it. She went to casinos and gambled. She bought whatever she set her eyes on that she fancied. And when people were questioning, like, why are you just going on a spending spree? Your husband just died. She would claim that because all she had left of Jack was money, she was going on these spending sprees and doing all this stuff in order to be closer to him. Yeah, I know people have coping mechanisms, but come on. Much like their Uncle Dave, Jack's daughters Cherie and Cheryl, they knew that Sandra was responsible for their dad's murder, but they had no definitive proof in order to, attach her to what happened. And there really was nothing that they could do at that time. And the Orange County Police Department began an investigation, but because of the lack of physical evidence and there was nothing concrete tying Sandra or anyone else to the murder, it pretty much went cold. So the police and Jack's family at that time were up the creek without a paddle. At this point, Jack's family and the Orange County Police Department were up the creek without a paddle. They had no idea how to proceed or what steps to take in order to find out who was responsible for Jack's murder. And the case, again, went cold, stayed cold for a number of years. But Dave Jessee, in particular, was not about to let this stand. He knew he had to get justice for his brother. Dave and Jack were incredibly close. David loved his brother so much, and he knew there was no way in hell he was going to let Sandra and whoever else was responsible get away with it. After all was said and done, Sandra decided to basically get out of Dodge. She sold Jack's house. She moved to Arizona to be closer to her son Tom. Her daughter followed not too long after, and they all bought houses. Sandra helped her kids buy houses that were close to where she was. They all lived within a few blocks of each other. Meanwhile, in California, and I said that it was the OCPD that was handling the case. Placentia PD was handling the case, and it got passed on to detective after detective after detective. And the case continued to remain cold, and there was really nothing else that the Placentia PD could find in, the form of physical evidence or anything that would help them determine who was responsible for Jack's murder. Eventually, the case passed from the Placentia PD to the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and it ended up in the hands of a man named Tom Dove. Tom Dove was a detective in the Sheriff's Department. He wasn't exactly well liked in his department, but he was a guy who had been around the block more than a few times. He was, as described in the Dateline episode, a legendary lawman. This guy was the real deal. Initially, when getting the case, Tom said he didn't feel a real connection to the case or feel anything in particular towards Jack or his family. He was just kind of doing business as usual. That was until he met with Dave Jessee. After conversing with Dave, Tom Dove said that he was inspired, and he told Dave that he was going to give it his all. He only had a few years to retirement, but he was going to make sure that he saw the case through to its end. And Dave looked at him and said, "You're the man." Tom Dove threw himself into the case. He examined it from pretty much every single angle. And for quite a while, by the time it ended up in the hands of Tom Dove, it's several years past the case. And it's in the mid 2000s at this point. I mean, anywhere from 6 to 7 years has already passed. It's around 2004, 2005, and this case is nowhere near being closed yet. Tom had encountered a few snags and more than a few hurdles in attempting to get this case solved, but he was no quitter, and he definitely wanted to make sure he looked at it from every angle that no one else had. And eventually, something jumped out at him while he was watching Sandra's interrogation video. During Sandra's interrogation, as she was giving her account of how the night went, where she was, what she was doing, at some point she decided to bust out her day planner, which ended up in evidence after this time. But she started to talk about different things in her day planner that she was getting to that day, and something jumped out at Tom Dove as Sandra mentioned a friend of Tom's. So Tom went to examine the evidence, which was still in police possession, and he located Sandra's day planner, and he got to that specific page where a name was written, and at first glance it looked like Schreiber. Knowing that this Schreiber was a friend of Sandra's son Tom, Tom Dove decided to look into who this man might possibly be. Knowing that he worked at Target with Sandra's son Tom, he decided to ask around, saying, has there ever been anyone by the name of Schreiber that worked at your store? And no one knew a Schreiber. There was no record of a Schreiber having worked there. In addition, Dove had been combing through all the other evidence and found a 2-page report that apparently had gone unread by anyone in the Placentia PD. Not too long after Jack's murder, there was a guy who walked into a bar. Sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke, but literally, this guy walked into a bar and started conversing with the bartender. Now, I don't know if he, after a few drinks, got a little loose-lipped and decided to spill the beans on what he'd been up to, but the guy who walked into this bar, started talking about a murder, and he started giving details that no one else except the person involved would have had. It wouldn't be until a few years later, when the case had already gone cold, that this bartender decided to submit a report to the Placentia PD detailing on what he heard that night in the bar when that particular person came in and detailed the story of Jack Jessee's murder. Unfortunately, the report was quite vague, and there wasn't any significant details, at least at first glance, save for the bartender heard the guy saying that there were 2 people involved. One of them was the murderer, and the other was the getaway driver. Apparently, the getaway driver was the one regaling the bartender of this very twisted tale, and said that with the money, he bought himself a truck and a jet ski. And it was during the telling of this story that he also revealed the other people involved, basically the masterminds behind the whole plot, Jack's stepson and his wife. It was after this that Tom Dove decided to revisit the interrogation tape of Sandra right after Jack's murder, and that's when that one detail about Tom's friend jumped out at him, saw the name in the planner, and that's when he decided to go on the hunt for whoever this person was. It was during this time that Jack's daughters, Cherie and Cheryl, were getting these weird packages in the mail from Sandra that were apparently keepsakes that belonged to their father, and it was basically a bunch of junk. Nothing that really had any particular meaning to them, everything from ashtrays to Jack's bowling bag and a few other things. And as far as they were concerned, Sandra was taunting them, basically saying, I won. I got away with it. I got away with murder, and I got everything. Yeah, I'm done with you. Here you go. Here's all the shit that I don't want that belonged to your father. Enjoy. Also during this time, Tom Dove decided to kind of take a different approach to trying to track down this mysterious Schreiber. And he had already done numerous calls to various Target stores all over Southern California, coming up with nothing. So he dug through old phone records, coming to several numbers that were all very close to each other in terms of when the calls were made and things like that. One was to a Target store, one was to a pager, and one was to a boarding house. Tom called the boarding house number and asked if they knew anyone by the name of Schreiber. They said no. But we do know a man by the last name of Schrauben, could that be the guy? Obviously referring to Tom's best friend and drug dealer, Brett Schrauben. The man initially contracted to carry out the murder of Jack, but ended up being the getaway driver while his friend Thomas Garrick committed the murder. Tom Dove would track down Brett Schrauben and found him in a suburb out in the Mojave Desert, and upon seeing his residence, in the driveway was a truck, a 1999 model truck, and a Sea-Doo jet ski. Exactly what the bartender had described in the report when he was hearing this strange tale from the bar patron that one night not long after Jack's murder. There were a number of hoops that Tom needed to jump through because one of the things that he wanted to try and do was get a wiretap. Well, wiretaps are incredibly difficult to get authorized. You got to get a judge to sign off on it. So Tom had to get his hands dirty, literally, which involved going through Brett Schrauben's garbage with the aid of other detectives who at this point thought that Tom had gone nuts, but they decided to help him anyway. And after the trash was taken from Brett's house, they would collect it, go through it, and they ended up finding crucial pieces of evidence. To make an incredibly long and belabored story short, they found day planners and other things, phone records that established that Brett was in contact with Sandra's son, Tom. The problem is, Brett's phone was in another name. They had to establish the phone belonged to him. Once they did that, they were able to get the wiretap in place. However, Brett was moving. He was looking for rental listings in Arizona, likely to be closer to Tom. He would no longer be in California, and he would be moving before the wiretap would take effect, so they were once again at a dead end. Months of detective work, half a year, gone down the drain. However, Tom Dove was not willing to give up. He was doggedly pursuing an end to this case. He was going to solve it come hell or high water, even at the cost of his own life and health. His wife was worried about him, but he was determined. And with the help of a California prosecutor, they booked a flight to Arizona. They were actually able to go to the Phoenix prosecutor's office, and they were able to secure a wiretap in Arizona. In addition to being able to recruit a bunch of Phoenix PD in order to help them solve this case. But they were going to have to be precise, and there was no room for error in trying to bait Sandra, Tom, and Brett into basically playing into their hands. So they decided to rattle them, and they sent Sandra, Tom, and Brett individually and anonymously the article about Jack's death around the time that he died, the article in the newspaper at the time, in order to stir up fear between the three of them. Tom calls his mother, says, "Hey, I got this in the mail," and guess what? Brett got it too. After Sandra said that she had gotten one, and she was confused as all hell because she's like, why would Brett get one? I don't understand what's going on. Tom has no friggin' clue as to why or how Brett would also get a newspaper article in addition to the two of them. Tom Dove starts poking around with some of Brett's friends that are still residing in California, and as a result, they call Brett basically saying, hey man, you need to call me. The cops are talking to me about you and some weird stuff about a murder or what. You need to call me back right now. Brett calls Tom in a panic saying, hey man, my buddy called me. The Orange County Sheriff's Department Homicide Division is looking into me. I don't know what the hell is going on. And both of them start to get paranoid and decide that it's not safe to talk on the phone anymore. In their paranoia, they wonder if somebody's listening. Somebody has tapped their phone. Somebody's bugged wherever they are. And so they have to try and find other avenues of communication. Tom Dove would fly back to Orange County, California and put some pressure on some of Brett's friends. He also would eventually track down the bartender that Brett had confided in that one night not long after Jack's murder, giving him details for whatever reason, thinking he could trust the bartender with them, specific details about Jack's murder that the general public didn't know, and details that only the authorities would have, and that was enough for the police to make an arrest. Brett Schrauben and Sandra Jessee were arrested, and they were brought to a preliminary trial. Unfortunately, Tom wasn't arrested due to insufficient evidence, and as the case was brought up before the prosecutor and the judge, it was determined that there was not enough evidence to hold Sandra, and she was released not long after her arrest. Brett Schraben was still held, and he was going to be the one who was charged with the murder of Jack Jessee, and this was around the summer of 2006, 8 years after Jack had been murdered. Facing a possible life sentence, Brett Schraben realized that he only had one option, and just days before his murder trial was about to start, he decided to talk with authorities, but his conditions were pretty steep. He told the prosecutor's office that he wanted credit for time served, or he wasn't talking about anything. Eventually, a deal was reached, and Brett Schraben decided to lay out the details, elaborate details, of the conspiracy, talking about when he was approached to do the job. He was given a $5,000 deposit by Sandra after meeting in a parking lot, and initially they were going to do it while she was out getting her nails done. He chickened out, didn't want to do it, was told by Tom, who was the one that he initially was approached by to do the job, it has to be done tonight, otherwise my mom's going to do it. Basically, the clock was ticking that day, August 13th in 1998. Thomas Garrick decided that he would be the one to go in and kill Jack, and that Brett instead would be the getaway driver. Brett dropped Garrick at the Jessee house. Garrick would commit the murder while Brett drove around the neighborhood, and they would communicate through walkie-talkies. Once the job was done, Brett came and picked up Garrick, and they took off. Thomas Garrick was questioned, denied everything. There wasn't enough evidence to hold him, so unfortunately, he walked. With Brett's testimony, both Sandra and Tom were arrested, and the case was being taken to trial. Unfortunately, the trial hit another snag, as when the jury was deliberating, there was one particular juror who, for whatever reason, seemed to sympathize with Sandra. The idea, and this was one of the things brought against Sandra as a motive for Jack's murder, in that the medical bills for his treatments for his colon cancer was going to eat up their savings, their nest egg, and all that kind of stuff. For whatever reason, this woman seemed to think that that was understandable. Jury was deadlocked, and after 3 days, the judge had enough, declared a mistrial. At this point, at the declaration of the mistrial, it's 2009, but 2 years later, Tom's attorneys reach out. And in a turn of events that no one could have anticipated, Tom Ehlert, Sandra's son, the mama's boy himself, decided to testify against his mom. He didn't want to die in prison, so he figured this was the only way he was going to achieve that. He also testified against Thomas Garrick, the one who allegedly committed the murder against Jack, where apparently Garrick had given a detailed account of how he killed Tom's stepfather. Tom Ehlert, Sandra's son, would end up being sentenced 15 years to life for his part in the conspiracy, but 1 month after he turned state's evidence against his mother, Sandra Jessee was finally found guilty. Thomas Garrick was also arrested for his alleged involvement. He continued to proclaim his innocence. The charges that Sandra Jessee will be found guilty of were special circumstances, murder for financial gain, and conspiracy to commit murder. For those charges, she was given the sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, Thomas Garrick would be acquitted of Jack's murder. There wasn't enough evidence to convict him of the actual murder, and he would end up going free. However, Sandra, the mastermind behind the plot, will be spending the rest of her life behind bars for what she had done, and the Jessee family was incredibly grateful for the fact that this finally had come to an end. It was in March of 2012 that Sandra was finally found guilty and accountable for what happened to Jack. However, there's one last detail that you're going to find particularly interesting, and it is pretty much the kicker in this whole case. Sandra was completely unwilling and even disgusted by the idea of helping her husband navigate this disease and recover and potentially beat it, including, certain things like emptying a colostomy bag and whatnot. The idea of this was so appalling to her that, you remember the nurse who initially tried to show her this, Sandra ran to the other side of the hospital covering her ears. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't even want to consider doing that. And that was when she decided that Jack had to go. The insane thing about all of this is that after Jack's autopsy was performed, they discovered that his cancer was at such an advanced stage that he would have been dead in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. All Sandra had to do was wait a couple months for Jack to pass naturally from his disease, and she would have been able to get her hands on all of his money, his 401k, his savings, his life insurance benefits, legally and guilt-free, with absolutely zero blood on her hands. If I'm being 100% honest, I hope that fact, I hope she knows that fact, and two, that it haunts her every damn day. I really hope you guys found this case interesting. Again, it's kind of crazy considering, you know, the small personal connection I have to it. I unfortunately never got to meet Jack. I was never that closely associated with Dave's extended family. I knew Dave and his wife Jane growing up. They were people that were very much a part of my mom's life and, you know, by extension, my life. And they are both really lovely people, and Dave was a very funny guy, great sense of humor, was a goofball, he just enjoyed life. He celebrated life, and he always was up for having a good time. And I know by what I've read and what I've seen, he absolutely loved and adored his brother Jack, and he was dedicated and determined to get justice for him. And it was that dedication that led to the eventual conviction of his former sister-in-law, and who is spending the rest of her life behind bars now. I know that Dave is greatly missed, having passed earlier this year, and I take comfort in the fact that he is now reunited with his brother. So again, guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to watch this and give this case your attention. I'm going to leave some links in the description below to the Dateline episodes that are actually on YouTube. And there's another YouTuber who years ago who covered this case, which I found really interesting. And it was through those videos that I got many of the details that I had, as well as a number of different articles. You can look it up online. A very compelling and interesting case. And yeah, it was a pleasure to be able to cover it on this channel, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you'd like to see me do more videos of this kind, please let me know. Be sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Happy Halloween, everybody. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys next time.